Are you overwhelmed by the challenge of personalizing communication for thousands of students? That's where Element 451's AI assistants come in. From nudging prospective students to guiding those already on their journey, AI assistants don't just automate, they write, build, and optimize every step of your digital campaigns. Discover how at element451.com/AI team.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to the Future of Student Search, a special 5-part Pulse Check series brought to you by Enrollify and Carnegie. Hosted by Trent Gilbert, VP of Student Search at Carnegie, this series explores the evolution of student search, digging into demographic shifts, economic pressures, and the latest technology trends, and featuring industry practitioners who are successfully navigating these changes. Get ready for student search discussions ranging from the philosophic to the tactical. Trent and his guests will tackle talent and tech stack, full funnel strategies for connecting authentically, and leveraging AI for long-term success. Our goal is to help you better connect with students during their college search. Let's jump into today's episode.
Hello and welcome. I'm Trent Gilbert, Carnegie's Vice President for Student Search Solutions, and today I'm joined by Paul LeBlanc. Paul brings a wealth of experience from his 2-decade tenure as president of Southern New Hampshire University. Under his visionary leadership, Southern New Hampshire evolved from a small regional institution into the largest higher education provider in the United States. Paul retired from his post at Southern New Hampshire this past June and is now the co-founder of Human Systems, a company working to reimagine learning for the age of AI. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Trent, thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Paul, we've been the previous episodes when we've been talking about the future of student search. We've talked about the people, we've talked about the data, but I think the one piece that I really am excited to talk to you about is technology. Right? You have been on this cutting edge of technology innovation in higher education, and so before we talk about the future of tech, I would love for you to share with our listeners. What have you learned from the past that's important for people to think about as they think about the future?
It's funny because when people think about SNHU, they often think about technology and they all often think about innovation. And I always say both of those things are in service of human relationship. So when we think about technology, whether we're talking about our CRM or whether we're talking about even the design of a website, it's always about what do students need most from us. So that's CRM, which our advisors use, for example, to support our students. It's really meant to amplify, give insights, improve the quality of the relationship between the two people engaged, the student and the advisor in that instance. So I think that's really, in the end, the most important lesson. When I think about technology and innovation, when it goes sideways, it's when it tends to decenter the importance and centrality of the learner or the student or the prospective student. It always wants to come back to that. I wrote a book in 2022 called Broken, How Our Systems Are Failing Us, our systems of care are failing us and how we can fix them. And I spent a lot of time interviewing psychologists and sociologists, et cetera. And really, they all point back to one critical piece. You can't transform a life if you're not in relationship with that person. This is true for counselors, doctors, teachers, healthcare givers, etc. I mean, what do patients want most from their doctors? To be seen as a human being. They want their doctors to know them, right? We have this need to be known. So the first chapter of that book is called Mattering. How do you make someone feel like they matter? So I think that's the single most important lesson, and it's a really critical one as we, and I know we'll talk about this eventually, go into this age of AI. Because it can feel to many people like AI is supplanting us, not centering us.
You can't transform a life if you aren't connected to the person.
If you think, Trent, I can name, Mark Schlafman, Elizabeth Collins, and Helen Heineman, my 6th grade teacher, my high school teacher, and my undergraduate mentor.
Yeah.
And those three teachers really transformed my life. And it's not because they were good teachers. They were that for sure. It's because they knew me. They made me feel like I mattered to them. They invested their time in me. They lifted my sights. They helped me dream a bigger dream for my life. As Mark Schlaffman in sixth grade said, you could go to college someday when no one in my neighborhood went to college. I was the
Mm,
first generation
powerful.
immigrant kid. No one in my neighborhood, right? And here was
Right.
the teacher said you could go to college someday. My mother held on. My mother worked in a factory till she was in her 70s, but she held on to that dream. It was Mrs. Collins in high school who then demanded more of me, but also ignited my imagination. We would sit in her classroom when class was done and talk about travel, and she instilled in me this passion and curiosity. But she was also the one that helped me talk through, what colleges I was looking at, because there was no one in my family who knew how to have that conversation, right?
Right.
No one had college in their background. So, it's just really critical. And if you think about, I ask this question of most people, you've had scores and scores of teachers. How many did you have that actually shaped your life? The average is three. That's what most people, will say three. So I think that is the most powerful and important thing, because education in the end of the day is about transformation, at least when it's most powerfully experienced.
It's funny you say that, is because like immediately you say that, and I think, and I hope our listeners are doing this as well. I personally went and started reflecting on who are those people in my life that I've had relationships with that have really kind of helped transform and grow me. And you're right. There's like three that immediately come to mind,
Yeah.
and then you could keep thinking about it and be like, oh, this person did this, but like there's those three that come to mind.
I love the work of Donna Beagle, who looks at extreme poverty and education, and how she has this quote. I'm not going to get it quite right, but if you look at anyone, and she herself escaped from extreme poverty, like we're talking about deprivation level poverty,
Hmm.
right? When you talk to someone who's escaped from extreme poverty, they never cite a program, they never cite a job, they never
Mm,
cite a policy, they cite a person.
a person.
It's usually one person who believed in them and lifted them up in some fashion. And that's a very powerful lesson in Donna's work.
So right, so when Southern New Hampshire was really kind of at this transformative stage, there's this moment where yes, we had technology, but it really, what I hear you saying is it really came down to the people, and it's less about the tools that were used, and it's more about using those technology in order to support the relationship building. Is that a fair assessment?
I think a lot of times when technology is deployed, it's with this, how do we automate? How do we get people out of the equation? How do we do this more cost effectively? And those are all, you could argue, reasonable questions. The questions we wanted to ask were slightly different ones, and the ones I might suggest to your listeners could also deploy, which are, how can we use technology to better understand the needs of our individual students? Not just the group, but the individuals. How can we use technology to get insight? How can we use technology to give them a better experience? How can we use technology to strengthen and amplify human relationship? How can we use technology to automate the things that aren't important to human relationship? So a good example of that would be, when a student needs to check on his or her balance and the status of her financial aid,
Hmm.
probably don't need to talk to a person. They just want to be able to do that quickly and easily. And we make that too hard. Like higher ed administrative systems still make it too hard. When a student is worried about, how will I pay for college next year, and maybe I shouldn't stay, maybe I should leave, that's a human conversation you want to be having, because that's really not about money in the end, though it is on a functional level. But it's also about confidence and hope, and having someone in your corner who's going to help you solve for that problem. We don't want a chatbot having that conversation. And I think I like the work of Chris Dede at Harvard. And again, I don't mean to keep leaping ahead to talking about AI, but, he talks about the distinction between AI's power to do predictive work. It's very, very good at that, transactional work, but it's not great at judgment and wisdom work. And we want to think that's a nice distinction. How do we How do we think about judgment and wisdom work? So there's a great, if you look at the way AI is being deployed in college admissions processes today, we're seeing a pretty rapid adoption because a lot of what happens in the admissions process is algorithmically driven. That
Mm.
is, you're looking at GPAs, how many AP courses did someone take? Did they take the hardest courses that were available to them? Did they take the courses that mattered to the individual institution, etc.? But algorithmically, algorithmic analysis doesn't give you insight, wisdom, and judgment about an individual learner. What was the circumstance of this learner? Did they overcome a lot? Do they demonstrate grit? Maybe they took fewer AP courses because they're also caring for ailing family member and they were also working 35 hours a week as in high school, right? Like these are the things that humans understand and can weigh and look at and think about. Algorithms don't do that very well.
Right. But algorithms can identify a transcript that has 6 semester Bs and 4 Cs. And I mean, they can come up with that quantifiable data point that then ultimately needs a human to put in context, right? Is taking that technology point and put that in context.
Yeah, and it's not a good use of an admissions person's time to sit there with pen and paper kind of calculating this stuff, right? Like there's just a lot of transactional analysis where AI will be really, really good. But
Right.
it's not to replace the admissions person, it's to free them up to spend time on the thing that they never feel like they got enough time on, which is can I get to know the student? Because they
Right.
have a lot of applications in front of them.
I'm laughing because I can't tell you how many hours of my career I have sat with a pen and paper, literally marking and trying to do those calculations. And I think for all of our listeners, especially those Florida transcripts, I would appreciate that. And so there's a lot to unpack there. So let's talk about AI. It is the future. It is here on a lot of levels. It's every conversation about kind of talking about the future of higher education, talking about the future of enrollment. There's conversations regarding AI and artificial intelligence. And so, what are the ways that AI are evolving and changing the work that we do? Right? I mean, you spent a lot more time learning and researching this than I have, and probably most of our listeners. But how is AI evolving and changing the work that we do in higher education?
So I'm in the camp that believes AI is changing everything. Like this is paradigm shifting. The
I would agree.
world utterly looks different today and will look radically different in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So what does that mean from a higher ed perspective? So at one level, I sometimes think about let's just talk about institutional kind of if you're a university today, how do you have to think about this? And then let's talk about kind of admissions and recruitment and the life of students. So on one level, you have to be thinking about what are the AI tools with which we have to equip our students? What are the
Hmm.
AI skills with which we have to send them out into the world? So there was a recent poll, something like 75% of last May's graduates believe that they were not well equipped by their universities to enter the world of work in terms of AI. Like they just didn't feel like they had the tools and the command they needed. Interestingly, and I think profoundly in the same week, was a poll of employers who said they would not hire, so like 75%, about the same percentage, said that they wouldn't hire somebody without command of AI tools. So you get this
Mm,
gap. You
sure.
literally have
Right.
this stark gap. Students saying, we're not been trained, and employees saying, we're not hiring you. So we got a lot of work, right? So in every major, every faculty member, every department chair, every dean needs to be in a robust conversation today saying, how do we change our curriculum to make sure that students are equipped to be competitive in the jobs into which we're sending them?
Mm,
It's that axiom you won't lose your job to AI, but you'll lose it to someone who knows how to use AI. So we have to make sure that our graduates are competitive. Now, I do think in the second, so that's immediate kind of phase two, is that I do think a lot of jobs will be lost to AI. The World
mm,
Economic Forum says that 80 million jobs will be displaced next year. McKinsey says something like 65% of jobs will be radically redefined. PwC has spent something like $3 billion on AI. It's not so they can hire more accountants, right? So
right.
the world of work will change. The workforce will change. The knowledge economy will inevitably change when we are no longer, i.e., human beings, the most powerful entities on the planet when it comes to certain kinds of knowledge making. So I think universities have to think about what majors, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this has implications for the admissions process because high school students are going to be asking these questions. They're looking at the world. They're using AI. 65% or thereabouts, two-thirds of high school students are now using AI in some fashion.
Hopefully for more than just writing papers.
Yeah, they are. And they report at least, they're using it. They're kind of creating their own AI tutors. They're using it as a backup. They're using it to search for things. They're using it to summarize. So they've read a complicated thing that they're struggling to understand. They'll use AI to help them understand it. So they'll use AI to polish their writing. And look in the end, we would be crazy to prohibit students from using the very tools that employers say they want them to master.
Right.
So we are going to have to rethink what is the role of writing. If you're using writing for assessment today, you've got a real problem because you're not going to be able to separate out the writer from the AI. Not easily anyway. But I think there are ways, and we could talk about how you handle that. But I think the third piece then, so first is, am I getting students the tools they need? Second, is my program offerings aligned with the changing nature of work in the age of AI? That's really just emerging. We have a lot of work to do to understand how that's going to change. I do have an argument about that, but let's just hold it there. And then the third area would be the degree to which universities will have this bigger existential question, which is, will they be as much about epistemology? Will they be as much about the question of what do I need to know to be an X or a Y? Or will they be more ontologically focused? How do you want to be in the world? Are they making better human beings? And universities like to think they're making better human beings, but they don't do a whole lot. They don't spend a whole lot of intentional time on that question. They spend a lot of time on curriculum. They spend a lot of time on the question of what do you need to know to be an X. So big changes ahead of us in higher education. And I think today's 10th grader, today's 6th grader, it will be entering into a world far different, and they're going to be asking different questions of us, I think.
One of the pieces that I hear time and time again as we talk about AI and our work is I think that there's this fear amongst people, right? There's this moment where like, okay, great, we're talking about AI, but like I'm skeptical of it. And some of that I think is selfishness, right? I'm skeptical that like AI is going to take my job. And you
Sure.
just said that there's, there's reports out there that AI will be taking jobs. So, what do you tell those skeptics or the people who are afraid of the future that is going to contain AI?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. There's a difference in the ones folks who are afraid, folks who are skeptical, and I know you were sort of making that distinction.
Mm-hmm.
So their change is in fact scary, and changes in the workforce where there can be winners and losers, where a stable job today that pays well disappears. Like that's a frightening notion, particularly if you're in that job.
Right.
And where are the jobs going to be, and what are the things we're going to be able to do? So I think if you work in higher education, probably the good news is that we're a regulated industry. So we don't change as quickly as unregulated industries do. And in fact, I would say almost predictably, we will see a backlash. We will see a lot of resistance to how we roll AI out in our work. For the folks who are skeptical of AI, I don't understand the skepticism. We've never seen a technology adopted at this rate. The speed at which ChatGPT went from 0 users to 100 million was dizzying. We've never, like nothing compares. No technology beforehand. And the rapid deployment of AI across so many fronts should really convince any skeptic that this is powerful, it's not going away. And the task is to ask hard questions. Like, don't be cynical. There's a difference between a skeptic and a cynic. So we need the skeptics to ask lots of hard questions because they're genuinely difficult questions. They're ethical questions. They're questions that are frightening, right? I mean, I remind myself all the time of the old axiom that human beings have never created a technology that they also didn't weaponize. So the Defense Department or every nation is figuring out how to use AI. We know Ukraine is a laboratory right now for the future of war. We're watching in real time how war is changing.
Hey, it's Seth. Element 451 is hosting the AI Engage Summit on October 29th and 30th. This free virtual event features many of your favorite Enrollify creators and will explore AI's impact on student engagement, enrollment marketing, and institutional success. Learn to tap into AI to automate personalized outreach, improve your emails, streamline content creation, and boost campaign performance. Plus, hear directly from current students on how AI is influencing their engagement and campus life. Don't miss my opening keynote, State of the State, a candid look at where we are and where we need to go. The AI Engage Summit is your guide to understanding and applying AI at your school. Registration is free. Visit element451.com to save your spot. Now, back to the show.
So there's lots to be afraid of in some ways, but there is a positive view here. And I think maybe this is the point when it's good to share it, which is, I'm going to quote Stuart Russell, who's the computer scientist at Berkeley, who says, if you had told our ancestors hundreds of years ago, imagine a bright future where every day you leave your home and go to a big box. It's called an office building, but it's a box. It comes in different sizes. And you'll go inside and you'll sit in a little glass box. They'll call it a cubicle, but it's a glass box and everyone can see you in your glass box as they walk by. And most of the day you'll stare at a little lit up box called a computer screen. They would have run screaming in the other direction. Yet that's not a terrible description of the lives of many people in the knowledge economy. And in the knowledge economy, we are often not very humanly connected. Take a look at the percentage of the American economy that is now grounded in finance, for example, literally the moving of money versus other kinds of work, which is more hands-on, and not that I'm calling for a romantic return to the agrarian past. But what if we could move away from the knowledge economy to the caring economy? What if the jobs that humans, what if AI will be better at knowledge economy jobs than humans in many, many, many instances? So what if humans could instead do caring economy jobs? What if we could rebuild our K-12 system, which is so broken, with amazing teachers and coaches and counselors and social workers? What if you could rebuild a mental health care system that's absolutely decimated, where we now use prisons? What if you could rebuild American infrastructure? What if you could rebuild our ailing inner cities in many places? Imagine that world. And those are jobs that today we don't tend to value very much, and we don't pay very much for them. They don't hold, teachers are not paid well. They're not held in high esteem. But what if things flip? What if the predominant place where humans do their best work are actually those jobs that are centered on human beings, improving lives, improving communities, improving society? Because a lot of the knowledge economy is soul deadening. A lot of those jobs are soul deadening jobs. They may pay well, but people don't feel good about them. So we have epic levels of loneliness and depression in our modern era that started before the pandemic. All those dials were moving in the wrong direction before the pandemic. Right. David Graeber, who I like very much, who passed away a couple of years ago, famous anarchist economist, which is a great combination. His last book was called Bullshit Jobs. And something like 65% of the world's workforce believes if they stopped doing their job today, no one would actually notice. Think about what that means for your inner life. We spend a big chunk of our conscious hours at work. And if you believe that your work has zero impact, zero meaning, it's pretty depressing. And it's reflected. Stuart Russell also talks about this a little bit in one of his famous BBC lectures is, what if we can redirect human energy away from moving information and inputting information and analyzing information and predicting information, because that's a lot of what the knowledge economy is. Right. And we move those jobs to jobs that we actually cared about. And I know that the next question is, well, how would we pay for it, et cetera, et cetera. And those are good questions. Bill Gates says, tax the robots. If you could flood our inner cities with amazing social workers and programs for kids and teenagers, think about what you would save in our prison system, because those kids go south very early in their lives. Imagine if we could start with early childhood programs for everybody. It's just, we know that this would work, and we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on things that are about our society being broken, like our prison systems. So that's one way to think about it. But Carlotta Perez is a British Venezuelan economist who I like very much. And She would say that when a paradigm shifting technology comes into a society, the way AI is coming into our society, and I do believe it is paradigm shifting, it changes the universe.
Right.
You go through a transition in which all your old assumptions get challenged, and things that used to be unshakably true are no longer. Things that were unimaginable become possible, and winners can sometimes become losers, and losers become winners. And in that world, sometimes it's decades. I think it'll be faster in this instance.
Hmm.
You could imagine a fundamental reshaping of the economy. You could imagine a world where we don't pay very much for an accountant. Like, why would you pay an accountant? I have an AI, right, that does that really. But give me
Right.
someone who knows how to take care of early, like, be an early child educator. That's magic. And anyone who has a kid will tell you it's magic. So it's not impossible. It's happened before. It happened with industrialization. In 40 years, the world changed utterly. Capitalism was invented for good or bad. Cities exploded in size. The agrarian wealth gave way to, they were land wealthy, but the real wealth was in the hands of factory owners and railroad owners and energy owners. And new technologies sprung up, like communications got way better and modern, and supply chain had to happen. And that meant global travel and supply and transportation, and railroads got invented. All of that happened because of industrialization. It changed the world. And it lifted enormous numbers of people out of poverty and created the middle class. All of a sudden, you now had a wealthy middle class. I think we're at the beginning of such a transition. And this is a long answer to your short question. They're hard. Like, you should be nervous. People should be a little afraid because they're hard. It's a lot of change. And she would also say in those transition periods is also when governments fall, when wars happen, right? Because the order is thrown up for grabs a little bit.
Right. We're in a little bit of state of chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, for a while. And then you emerge into the next, which you would call the next golden era. So I hope we get there faster and that the chaos is not too bad, but it will be like buckle in. We're in for a little bit of a wild ride. And if I were giving people advice, not that it's my job to do so, it would be become very conversant in the tools. Like, I'm not going to play with this, like, or just understand them, like play with it, play with ChatGPT, start using the tools, find out what the tools are in your field. They're kind of amazing. And then secondly would be to really think hard if you're thinking about your own career path, like where are the jobs where human relationship matter, because AI is not good at that.
When I think about kind of the future of AI, and I think we've had this conversation, is right, there's that moment where there potentially is a point down the road where AI will be able to respond to your emotional state, right? And you're doing work in this
Mm-hmm.
space, right?
Yeah.
Like, talk a little bit about kind of that moment. Like, I mean, I think about this moment where, from an emission standpoint, where all of a sudden you have, you know, a bot that, I'm checking my balance, right? I'm checking my balance and I'm using AI in order to do that. But the AI bot realizes that, like, you telling me my balance is that I owe, $3,500 is causing me stress and anxiety. And now the AI bot hands me off to a human being. Like, is that a way to be thinking about the future?
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting because I think, boy, it's such a complicated question. It's one I wrestle with because I've started to believe that people will embrace their algorithmic coworkers, counselors, friends. I mean, friends, can you imagine? But
Mm-hmm.
we see it already, like the way people are responding to AI and getting comfort from it, confiding in it, finding that, oh, my AI tutor is non-judgmental. My AI never
Mm,
makes me feel stupid. I'm not embarrassed to ask this question because
right.
it's AI. So they know it's AI, and yet it becomes this sort of relationship. And I think that's so complicated. I don't know if you know James Bridle's book, Ways of Being, but in some ways, is it so different than, and dog lovers will yell at me for this, but is it so different than, walking and talking with your dog? Your dog has a way of knowing. It is not a human way of knowing, but it is a kind of relationship that incredibly emotional, right? Incredibly strong, because your dog wags its tail madly every time you walk in, and people say, my dog loves me in a way no one else does, right? And I love my dog back. I think AI will quickly become that. And I think it's weird, but I don't know that it's bad. I just think it's a different way of being in the world. And, in the project that we're doing, Human Systems, this new company, we agreed if all of our users were in a kind of darkened bedroom talking to their AI and thinking that it was as good as humans, we'd pull the plug on the project. So we're very, very engaged in this question of how do we go ahead and harness that for all the good that can come with it? And there is a lot of good. Look at, we have this epidemic of loneliness. I mean, we have young people, 72% of them report themselves as extremely lonely. People were shocked about a year ago, maybe a little bit more now, when I think it was Pew revealed that 25% of American adolescent girls say that they had planned their suicide in the last 12 months, and 13% had actually tried. I mean, that is house on fire crisis level.
Right.
And if we can use AI, and this is what we're trying to build and integrate into human systems, if we can provide tools for better well-being, for resiliency, and if part of that is using AI in a way that feels humane, human even a bit, but doesn't supplant human relationship, impels you to be in relationship with others, improves your ability to do so, it's a hard thing to sort out, but we are in for such a fascinating period of time here on this. I find comfort in the fact that our next full-time employee at Human Systems is a philosopher and an ethicist, because I think we are entering into really complicated philosophical and ethical gray areas.
When I think about this loneliness problem, it started way before AI. It started way before
social media
and way before COVID, right? I mean, like I remember probably a decade ago reading a study about the fact that like adolescents weren't dating anymore, right? They're not that human interaction isn't there. So it's interesting is, we started this conversation about human connection and using technology to create that human connection. And so I think there's that moment of the optimist in me would like to think that the future of AI and the future of AI in our work and enrollment and marketing efforts, it's really about driving that human connection and getting to that point in time.
Look at, if you go back and start dating when we saw loneliness increasing, it does have a lot to do with our modern era, frankly. It does have to do with the dominance of the information economy. It does have to do with a lot of sociological phenomena that had to do with wealth distribution. So Robert Putnam, the sociologist who wrote the book Bowling Alone, talks about the privatization of our lives. That, the title comes from when people used to belong to the bowling league, but the bowling league would have a doctor and a cop and a teacher and a construction worker. And you knew people, right? So we are isolating in various ways. I think our devices, our iPhones, further isolated us. And then I'm in the camp that thinks social media was a massively terrible thing to do to our young people. So it took all of that and exacerbated it so that young people have never been more connected and never more lonely. And likes are not friends. And people's curated lives on Instagram are you're never going to match up, because those aren't reality. Those are as fake as if AI had created them, right? So when you take all of those things, we have an abject lesson on what happens when you get it wrong and when you don't deploy these things with intentionality and care. And one of the things that gives me a little bit more optimism about AI is that there is so much conversation about how we do this. There is conversation today about guardrails. I do think that we are going to see a lot more care taken for how this happens, because I think we learned the hard way that not doing so, when it just seemed like a fun thing. This thing called Facebook is really cool. Really cool. You connect with your friends, right? Little did we know that it would be used to create political echo chambers and disinformation that has undermined our political system, as we've seen and continue to see in the news today. So there's a lot of conversation going on, Trent, and I do think one of the ways we guard against that is we don't simply take what commercial interests have created for us, but we take a shaping hand and influence on what this looks like, which is why Human Systems was created, right? Like, I believe higher education can't simply use AI as commercial interests want us to. We have to develop AI in the ways that we know work best as educators, as people who care about students. And I think there's promising signs.
Paul, thank you so much. This has been really, it's been interesting to be thinking about kind of that future aspect and how technology and how AI is going to come and shape our worlds. And I think it's important for our listeners to be thinking about and asking these questions of ethical use of AI. It's important to be thinking about how do you use AI and technology in order to foster the human connection that is still going to be important, right? Because at the end of the day, as a higher ed professional, I want my kids and my kids' kids, when you're asked the question, who are those people in your life that made a difference, being able to answer with people, because people are still going to be center part of this equation. And this has been really fascinating. So thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Trent. I love your closing note. Like, we have our first grandson a few weeks ago. And I want him, when asked that question about those people who were transformational in his life, not to have 3 like I do. I want him to have 6 and 9 and 12, right?
Right.
And if we do this well, we have an opportunity to rebuild, because right now things are pretty broken. Like, who feels like the world's working well right now? Not many people. No, and that's not even a political question. Like, right and left, people feel like things are pretty broken. And I think what we saw with the Olympics, for example, was this kind of sigh of relief and joy in watching what looks like when people can come together and celebrate each other. So on that note, that's a nice note to end on. I like that you gave us the gift of that final sentiment. Thank you. Yeah.
And Paul, you've referenced a lot of awesome research, and we're going to link that all in the show notes. That maybe we'll have AI right, maybe even being all right. Maybe we'll never know. Paul, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. For the listeners, we'll have the next episode in the series we'll release next week, and we look forward to you tuning in. Thanks so much for tuning in to the future of Student Search.
This Pulse Check mini-series has been brought to you by Carnegie. Carnegie is the human connection company. Whether you're in marketing, enrollment, advancement, or student life, a volunteer, or the president, success is predicated on connecting, literally and figuratively. Carnegie connects colleges and universities with students by fusing human psychology with marketing and enrollment innovation. Carnegie offers groundbreaking solutions that lead to action, enrollment, retention, and lasting affinity. Learn more on carnegiehighered.com.